Welcome back, everyone. We're diving into ancient China today.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and getting a little philosophical.
Sounds fun.
So you know how we rely on data and algorithms to understand, like, oh, what's the world today? Economies and stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
They did things way different back then, in ancient China. They looked for auspicious signs and calamities, like omens, but for entire nations.
Interesting.
Yeah. Imagine a world where, like, if a philosopher decided to move,
Yeah.
that could be a sign that, like, a whole kingdom was about to crumble.
Wow.
Yeah, right? That's what we're going to explore using these two historical texts. Pretty influential stuff, actually.
I'm intrigued.
Okay, so first up, we got Sima Guang, who wrote this massive history called Zizi Tongjian. And then we have Zhu Xi, who kind of riffed on that and wrote Tongjin Gengmu.
So they both wrote about Chinese history.
Yeah, but they had different perspectives.
Gotcha.
It's like one of the figures they disagreed on was Mencius.
Oh, the philosopher.
Right. Sima Guang, he was kind of skeptical of Mencius.
Right.
But Zhu Xi, he thought Mencius was like a total sage, the real deal.
That's a pretty big difference.
Yeah, and it's not just about these two guys, It kind of reflects how people thought differently in their times, too.
Yeah, I can see that.
Sima Guang, he was all about realpolitik, like the practical stuff, power plays.
Realpolitik, huh?
Yeah. But Zhu Xi, he was more of an idealist, steeped in Confucian thought and all that.
Okay, interesting.
And a great example of how they clashed is this whole event of Mencius leaving the state of Qi.
What happened?
For Zhu Xi, this was huge, a major calamity. He thought it meant that Qi was heading for disaster. Crazy, right? Just a philosopher moving, and it's like the end of the world.
Well, not literally the end of the world.
Right, of course. But for them, it was a big deal.
Yeah, it must have meant something more than just, like, packing up and moving.
Totally. See, back then, they believed that if you had a wise person, a sage in your state,
Yeah.
it brought good fortune, like a blessing.
Yeah, I see.
But if they'd left, bad news. It meant that the ruler wasn't following the Tao.
Now?
Yeah, it's kind of like a universal principle of harmony and good governance.
Ah, okay.
So when Mencius left, it wasn't just about him personally,
Right, it was symbolic.
Exactly. It meant the ruler was messing up, straying from the right path.
Zhu Xi saw that as a super bad sign.
Yeah. A break in the lineage of wisdom, like a sign that things were out of whack.
Didn't you say Sima Guang had a different take?
Oh, yeah. He barely even mentions Mencius leaving in his book.
Really?
Yeah. That's Sima Guang for you, all about the hard facts, the wars, the politics.
So, like, the moral implications weren't as important to him.
Exactly. He was more interested in the tangible stuff, less about the symbolism.
That's fascinating how two people looking at the same event can see it so differently.
Right. But Zhu Xi's take, it really makes you think, like, even today.
How so?
Well, if a leader's not living up to their ideals, the smart people, the advisors, they might just bail.
Oh, I see what you mean.
It makes you wonder, are we listening to the Menciuses in our own lives?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Are we taking their advice, or are we letting ego and short-term thinking cloud our judgment?
Deep.
Yeah, it gets even more interesting when we look at what happened with King Xuan of Qi. He was this ambitious ruler who wanted to conquer the neighboring state of Yan.
Conquer? Oh, boy.
Yeah, but here's the kicker.
What?
He actually went to Mencius for advice before he did it.
Really?
Yeah. Like, imagine a king asking a philosopher for military strategy.
Did he take the advice?
Nope. Completely ignored it.
Oh, no. That can't be
You
good.
guessed it. Total disaster. Mencius told him to win over the people of Yan, be compassionate. But King Xuan, he was all about brute force.
Didn't work out too well, I'm guessing.
Rebellion, chaos. He lost Yan altogether. A major calamity, if there ever was one.
Wow. Ignoring good advice, it's a classic recipe for disaster, even back then.
Right. But this story, it's not just about a bad military decision,
What else is there?
It gets into this whole debate about, like, what is wisdom? What makes a good leader?
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, because there's this conversation between Mencius and one of King Xuan's relatives.
A relative.
Yeah, Chen Jia, he kind of tries to defend the king, saying even sages make mistakes.
Bold move, defending a king who just messed up big time.
Right. But he was clever about it. He brings up this example of the Duke of Zhou, this legendary figure. And he basically says, even the Duke made a mistake once that caused unrest.
So he's trying to make King Xuan look better by comparing him to a legendary figure.
Exactly. It's like he's saying, hey, everyone messes up, even the greats.
Sneaky. But it makes you wonder, are even the wisest among us fallible?
It's a big question, right? We've gone from a philosopher moving to a king ignoring advice to now questioning the nature of wisdom itself. This is getting deep. But before we go too far, let's unpack this whole concept of auspicious signs and calamities a bit more. What exactly were they looking for? What counted as an omen of good or bad fortune?
That's a great question. And to answer that, we need to dive into how these ancient Chinese thinkers viewed the world, like their whole cosmology.
All right, lead the way. Let's get into their worldview and see what other auspicious signs and calamities they believed could shape a nation's destiny. Okay, so worldview time. What were they looking for when they were talking about auspicious signs and calamities?
So for them, the universe wasn't like this random thing. It was all connected. And human actions, they could mess with that balance big time.
I see. So they thought people could actually influence, like, the cosmos.
Yeah. And they believed events in the natural world, things like crazy weather or, a comet appearing.
Right.
Those could be signs, like messages from the heavens.
Oh, wow. Like if a comet showed up, that was bad news.
Yeah. It could mean disaster was coming.
Yikes.
But on the flip side, like if the harvest was amazing, it could mean the ruler was virtuous.
So it wasn't just about individual actions. They were looking at nature, too.
Totally. A good ruler would keep things in harmony, between heaven and earth.
That makes sense. Harmony equals good times.
Exactly. But a bad ruler,
Right.
they can throw everything out of whack.
That's when the calamities hit.
Floods, droughts, you name it. It's pretty different from how we see things now.
Yeah, we're all about data and science these days.
Right. But I gotta admit, there's something kind of cool about that ancient view,
Yeah, that idea of interconnectedness.
Exactly. Like, our actions ripple outwards, affecting everything.
It kind of makes you think twice about your choices.
It does, doesn't it? And even though we might not interpret a comet the same way,
Right, of course not.
that idea that actions have consequences, it's still relevant.
Totally, like the butterfly effect and stuff.
Exactly. And we see it all the time, how politics affects the environment and vice versa.
So even though the specific signs might be different, the core concept is still there.
Yep, we're all connected, part of something bigger. And that's a key takeaway for our listeners.
For sure.
Like, it's about being aware, recognizing that our choices matter.
Yeah, it's empowering, actually. We're not just along for the ride. We're shaping things.
Exactly. But let's bring it back to our historians for a sec. We've been talking a lot about Zhu Xi.
Right, the idealist.
Yeah. What about Sima Guang, the pragmatist?
Good point.
Yeah.
How did his worldview play into this auspicious signs and calamities thing?
Well, remember, he wasn't so into symbolic interpretations.
Right, more about the real politics.
Exactly. He was more interested in how rulers responded to those events,
How they used them to their advantage.
Exactly. Say there was a natural disaster, Sima Guang would analyze how the ruler used that.
To, like, gain more power.
Yeah, or get rid of rivals, things like that. He was all about the human element, the strategy behind it all.
So we have two totally different approaches.
Right. Zhu Xi looking for moral lessons and cosmic significance, and Sima Guang.
Analyzing how those events were, like, manipulated.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that tension between idealism and pragmatism, we still see it today.
All the time, like in debates about climate change, economics, social issues.
It makes you wonder, do we lean more towards symbolism or pragmatism?
Right. Or is it a mix of both?
Probably depends on the person, their worldview, their experiences.
But the point is to be aware of those biases.
Yeah. Be open to different perspectives, critically examine things.
That's so important, especially nowadays with echo chambers and all.
Totally. Like those historians, there's always more than one way to see things.
And by looking at different viewpoints.
We can understand things better.
Yeah. But before we wrap up this ancient China adventure, I'm curious how these ideas connect to us today, What can we learn from all this auspicious signs and calamities stuff?
That's a good question. We might not believe in omens literally.
Right.
But that core principle, actions have consequences. That interconnectedness, it's still there.
So instead of looking at the stars...
we can look at our own lives.
Okay, I like that. But what exactly should we be looking for?
Well, what are the auspicious signs in your life? Those moments of joy, connection.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Are you paying attention to those, letting them guide you?
It's like being mindful of the good stuff, right?
Exactly. And then there are the calamities, those tough times, the setbacks.
Nobody likes those.
But they're signals, too. Opportunities to learn, to change course.
So it's not about avoiding the bad stuff.
It's about learning from it, using it to grow.
That's a great way to look at it.
The real wisdom isn't about predicting the future. It's about being aware, being responsive.
Learning from everything, good and bad.
Exactly. That's where the growth happens.
So we've explored all this, auspicious signs and calamities from ancient China.
Yeah. Philosophers moving, kings ignoring advice.
The whole shebang. But what does it all mean for us,
Right. Like, how do we actually apply these ancient ideas today?
Exactly. I'm not exactly an emperor dealing with oracles here.
Right.
So how do I take all this ancient wisdom and, use it in my life?
Well, think about it. We might not have emperors running around.
Right.
But we still have leaders, people whose actions, they have a big impact.
Okay, yeah, I see that.
Like the ancient Chinese, they believed a wise person could bring good fortune to a whole state.
Yeah.
And if they left, trouble.
Right. Like some people, they just make everything better.
Exactly. And then there are those who, well...
bring everyone down.
Right. So maybe instead of looking for, literal omens in the sky...
we can look at the people around us.
Exactly. Who inspires you? Who challenges you to grow?
That's deep. So it's about choosing who we surround ourselves with, who we follow.
Exactly. Because even though we're not in ancient China anymore...
our choices still matter.
they shape the world around us, for better or worse.
This has been, wow, such a thought-provoking deep dive. We started with these old texts, and now we're talking about leadership and choices.
It all connects, right? The past might be different, but the human stuff, it's all still relevant.
So as we wrap things up for our listeners, what's the one thing you want them to remember from all this?
I'd say don't underestimate the little things, the seemingly small events. Pay attention to the people you're with, the choices they make, the impact they have.
Because even with all our data and technology...
the wisdom of the past still holds up.
that's a great takeaway. And hey, if you want to learn more, check out those sources we mentioned.
Zizi Tongjin and Tongjian Gangmu.
They're really fascinating reads, trust me.
And just a final thought, something to ponder.
Okay, hit me with it.
Even today, with all our information and gadgets, do we still look for those auspicious signs and calamities?
Yeah?
Just in different ways.
That's something to think about. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep learning.